Joining us now is Michael Bennet. He's a senior senator from Colorado. He's a 2020 Democratic presidential candidate who also sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And let's start there with that nuance, inquiry versus investigation. Help us understand how your committee, the committee of which you're a part, views that complaint and is moving forward on.
I think what we are doing, we are at the most preliminary phases of this. I have every confidence that we will run down what needs to be run down, but I think the chairman is saying basically this is just the very beginning, and I really can't comment on the work of the committee beyond that.
You are in the jury pool, I suppose, waiting to be impaneled. So without talking about the work of the committee, talk about this moment and what the House is trying to do.
We're at a historic moment in this country's history. I think this president has run roughshod over the Constitution basically since before he was in office. And I think at a certain point, enough was enough. Nancy Pelosi had no choice. And now what we have to do is honor the Constitution by following a process that upholds the rule of law and gives the American people confidence that what we're doing is something that is consistent with the rule of law. And I am confident that that's what will happen. And some of the early reports about what the president has been doing in the Oval Office are deeply disturbing.
Without talking about the work of the committee, there has been a lot of reporting on the discord, lack of collegiality in the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And from the clip we just played there, you saw Richard Burr and Mark Warner standing side by side, and it has been, to a great extent, a model of bipartisanship at a time when in Washington there isn't a whole lot of it. Can you speak to that, the way to which both sides are unified?
It's a place where, you know, the doors are closed a lot of the time and people aren't preening in front of the cameras, and it, I think, gives people an opportunity to work together in a bipartisan way. It's not to say we do that perfectly, but if ever the country needed that, I think it's now, and I am confident in the people, the members of that committee, to try to do that. In the end, we may not succeed, but I think we will start that way.
The last question on this point, there were members of the House, Republican members of the House, who were outraged at Joe Maguire having to testify publicly. So in the interest of transparency, having that happen, they suggested it should have been something that happened behind closed doors, as it did with your committee. Help us understand that tension when it comes to intelligence matters, to air something of such great import as this so that the public knows what's going on, while it's all the while keeping it as something that is
in a case like this, you're going to have to balance it, and actually, I don't think it's a bad thing that the House and Senate might strike that balance differently from one another, but in the end, what you want to do is have the secrecy that's required to be able to protect the whistleblower, for example, which is incredibly important, but at the same time build public confidence in the process. And if you remember, you know, what went on during Watergate, it was one of the critical components of that was making sure the public understood what the testimony was and what the evidence that was being developed by the committee looked like. We're going to have to do that here too. Anybody in Washington who makes the assumption that the American people have their mind made up here hasn't spent any time in the heartland of this country. That's a place where people are working hard to move their families ahead and build their businesses, and you know, they're sick of the dysfunction in Washington, and there's some people there who are going to see this as just more Washington dysfunction. That's why I think it's incumbent on those of us that have responsibility here to make sure that we do it in a way that's faithful to the rule of law and brings the American people along with us.
You have spent time in the heartland, you have been campaigning, and I wonder about the resonance of this issue in particular. Steve Bullock here, Governor Steve Bullock, just a few moments ago, saying he could talk to 30 people and none would bring up impeachment. It wasn't front of mind to them. Is that changing to your mind?
Well, actually, that was true up till this point. I haven't been to Iowa since the latest allegations about Ukraine were made and since the investigations were launched. But up until then, you're correct. I mean, what I am hearing about is people saying we're working as hard as we can possibly work. We can't afford housing, health care, higher education, early childhood education. If our kids are in poverty, we're working hard and we can't get our kids out of poverty. That's what people are actually talking about. But that is not a reason for us not to pursue this. I mean, we have to get to the bottom of this stuff. The latest allegations this morning about the president, you know, telling the Russians that he didn't care whether they hacked into our democracy in 2016. I mean, that is, would be completely unbelievable, except it's entirely consistent with everything that he's said, you know, before and since. And so I think the time has come for us to really figure it out.
You see the impulse for outrage in this moment, and you have regarded yourself as a pragmatist, as somebody who would like a return to quote-unquote normalcy. Is that out of keeping with where we are? How do you think about that?
It might be. I mean, you know, what the people have called me, or a journalist wrote about me saying I was a pragmatic idealist. And I think those two things are important. Pragmatic because I want to get stuff done, because I'm sick and tired of wasting the American people's time. They got stuff we need done. When was the last time we passed a real infrastructure bill in this country? When was the last time we did the basic blocking and tackling that they expect us to do? But on the other hand, an idealist because I believe in this exercise of self-government. We are the longest lasting democracy in the history of the world, and the world needs us to survive, you know, and these checks and balances that we're now seeing kick into place after the president has been doing what he's doing are critically important. My argument is that, as I said, we have to follow through in a way that's consistent with the Constitution and the rule of law, and that will be a victory for the rule of law and a victory for the democracy, no matter how it turns out. We have to get back to that sense of, you know, an article of faith about how important this democracy is and our stewardship of it for the next generation and the generation after that.
Can't let you go without asking about these debates. You haven't qualified for the one in October. There's one in November.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Can't
let me go without mentioning
We'll get at the end of the conversation here. Are those pivotal points for you?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, the first time I got thrown off the debate stage, I felt pretty terrible about it, and then it turned out that it didn't have any effect on the way people are thinking about the race because it's so early. I mean, this is like deciding who should be in the playoffs based on preseason football. And so I'm just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other. I think this race is completely unconsolidated, and folks in Iowa and New Hampshire literally this week are basically, you know, beginning to start the process of figuring out what they want to do. So we got a long way to go.
Senator, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
In Austin.
Great
Senator Michael Bennett,
thank you.
Gentleman from Colorado, joining me here on set in Austin.